Please join me in welcoming to the stage the one and only Mellody Hobson. Thank you, Mellody. Mellody, I don't know if you know this, but it has taken me a cool 8 years to get you to come to this stage. Yeah, so I know that tenacity is part of your history, part of your DNA, but I've tried to try in my small way. So really, after all, with your busy schedule, we're so delighted that you finally made it. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for wanting me. I better do a good job if it took 8 years.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, you know, Mellody, I understand your background. You grew up very privileged with a silver spoon.
No, not the case. No spoon.
No, tell me a little bit about your upbringing. And obviously, you've kind of come to the upper echelon of the corporate entrepreneurial investing world. How did it happen? Tell us a little bit about some of those most formative events.
Well, it was a long and winding road. And I think like many in the audience, many of us have the story of, pulling ourselves along with a lot of help from other people. But we were definitely, as a family, I called us under-resourced. I was the youngest of 6 kids and am the youngest of 6 kids. My mom was a single mom in Chicago. And my siblings are much older than me, a couple decades older. So they made it very clear to me regularly that I was not planned. And they would say things like I was found at the doorstep, which is terrible. But one of the things that happened along the way was we had a hard time. My mom had a difficult time making ends meet. She also, and I say this with great respect and admiration for my mother, who's no longer alive, she was not ever trained or taught anything about money, and so she made very, very poor money decisions. And they were with good intentions and a good heart, but they set us back. So I had a mom who would buy Easter dresses instead of paying the light bill. So we wouldn't have any lights, but we'd look good at church. And that ended up being very destabilizing for me, and it caused great anxiety and worry for me because we often got evicted, our phone got disconnected, we would hide our car to keep it from being repossessed. We lived sometimes in abandoned buildings. Like a lot of things happened that were just really rough. But the good news is, because I think out of every crisis, as people say, comes great opportunity, is that it grounded me in this desperate need to understand money. And so I tell people, I don't think it's any accident I work in the financial services industry or I am on the board of JP Morgan, et cetera, because as a child, I wanted to understand how money works so that I could have a better life. And my experience or my thought process was not about a lot of money. I just wanted the basics, quite honestly. I wanted to know where I would live and that I could pay my bills and that I would have some level of security that I just didn't know growing up. And that foundationally gave me, at an extremely young age, the purpose that I'm still living today.
And so today, you're now co-CEO of Ariel Investments, which the more I learn about it, the more impressed I am with what you've built culturally and organizationally, and we'll come back to that. But I mean, I think that whole journey started from a phone call from a basement in Princeton. Like, how did that happen, and what did that phone call teach you about opportunity or risk? Would love to hear your thoughts.
So some amazing things happened to me, and that's why, life is preparation and luck. There's no question, because there was a lot of luck along the way, but ridiculous preparation. I mean, I was a child who would pull all-nighters when I was in 5th grade. I mean, literally, I was a weirdo because I really did believe all I had was my brain.
Right.
I really believed that I had nothing else, nothing. And so I said, I must maximize any opportunity I can to learn so that this brain can take me further. And so when I had the opportunity to go to Princeton. My family doesn't know how I came to be obsessed with Ivy League schools as a child, but I was, because no one in my family went to college. So I used to say that I was going to Yale. And I said it over and over and over again until we saved up money for me to take a trip to Yale. And I got there and I was like, I'm not going to Yale. And I started crying because I was like, I got this all wrong.
Yeah.
Well, I ended up going to Princeton. Some fortuitous things happened along the way there. But one of the things in going to Princeton, I met John Rogers, who was a very well-known Princeton alum. He started our firm as the first African-American-owned investment firm in the United States when he was 24 years old. He's 11 years older than me. He was on the board of Princeton when I was there as a student.
Wow.
So when he was going for trustee meetings, he would visit with me and have lunch with me, et cetera. I was thinking free meal. Ultimately, I became a summer intern at Ariel, and that's where my first introduction to money ever happened. And my eyes were open to something I had no idea about. The stock market, investing, businesses, everything you could possibly imagine. It just came washing over me, and I knew that's where I wanted to work and where I wanted to be. But before I actually committed, after I was a summer intern, John said, you have an open invitation to join the firm. But I thought, I'm just gonna go to one of the big firms, Goldman, Merrill, Bank of America, et cetera. So I did all the interviewing while I was in my senior year. I was writing my thesis, living in the basement of the Woodrow Wilson School, which is no longer known as that, where we had our carols and we were studying. And I was going to New York on a regular basis to interview. And in one of my interviews with one of the big firms, one of the guys looked at me and he said, you know what? You are not gonna be successful here. And I was stunned because I was so conscientious and so excited and had studied hard for the interview. And he said, you're gonna be 4 layers down, 5. He's like, you're not gonna be near any action. And he's like, you're gonna be great at copying and binding books. And so I took this all in good, some of my best jobs. I worked in a storeroom once and I loved it. Yeah. So I was like, okay, I'll make the most out of it. Well, at the same time, John Rogers had been trying to convince me to come. And so one night, it's literally the middle of the night, I'm sitting in the basement of Woodrow Wilson School. I went to the payphone, and it wasn't the middle of the day, excuse me. I went to the payphone, and I called Ariel Collect, I swear. And those were those days, where the operator would come on, and they took the call on the other side, the receptionist. And I said, may I speak to John Rogers? And I said, I'm gonna come and work for you. And he said, why did you pick me? And he said, because I can sit right with you and learn from the smart person. Wow. And I said, well, why wouldn't I do that? My friends were shocked. This little firm in Chicago that $1 billion, $1.6 billion in assets. I was one of the early employees. What are you thinking? You're not going to one of the big firms. And I withdrew from all of those other firms because I could sit and work with John. And it was someone who was committed to training me. And he trained me in a very aggressive and great way, super hard, of course, but something that I think made all the difference into who the person I became.
And so in this journey where obviously you had to break barriers, you had people saying no and challenging you and all of that. From that journey, what lessons were most valuable for you in now leading an investment firm? And maybe if we could segue from there at some point to what lessons the folks in this room could take from that experience.
Well, first of all, and I think this is true of many entrepreneurs, and you have some great entrepreneurs in this room from everything I've read, I think there is something to be said for taking the road less traveled. Like, I really did something that went against the grain at that time, and that ultimately paid off for me in a really big way. I also think one of the lessons that I learned very early was Ariel is a learning culture. And to have this, what I call beginner's mind, this is not something I dubbed, but is known out there, this idea that you are in a constant state of learning. John used to give me all these books to read. He gave me books about every coach you could imagine. You read Auerbach, John Wooden, Vince Lombardi, coaches. I read coaches. And he also had me read about great entrepreneurs, Ray Kroc. And there was a book in there was a line in Ray Kroc's book where he said, as long as you're green, you grow. When you're ripe, you rot. And so I thought a lot about that. And I said, I just want to stay green. So I'm learning, as opposed to thinking I have all the answers. Right. And I think that made a huge, huge difference. And I think that still makes a huge difference today. I go into rooms, I was with someone very recently, a well-known, superstar leader, and they were speaking with such certainty. And I finally said to them, I was like, wow, you're pretty sure about everything, and I don't know anything. I was like, the older I get, the less I know. I was like, I'm literally not certain about anything. And, it's just a different way of thinking. The other thing that I learned at Ariel, I say this all the time, I tell our team, new mistakes. Do not make the same mistake. Because one of the things that I think is detrimental in life is people repeat. They have cycles and patterns. We had that in my family.
Right.
Patterns around money, patterns around education, etc. Breaking patterns means not making the same mistake. And so one of the things I talk about at Ariel, you can make a mistake, just don't make it twice. And the way that you don't make it twice is you make sure you have processes in place that ultimately underscore whatever you're supposed to learn, however you're supposed to do something, so that you don't do it again. So process and routine and things like that become very important to me, and no excuses, none. I grew up with a mother who used to say that to me when I was very little. I was in first grade. I had a teacher that was not great. And I went home to my mother. I used to be sick every day. I did not want to go to school. I didn't learn to read till I was in second grade because I had so much anxiety around this experience. I went home to my mom one day and I was like, I think my teacher is a racist. And my mom looked at me and she was like, don't ever say that again, ever. I was 6 years old and she was like, I don't ever want to hear that from you again. Figure it out.
Wow. So much to tap into there.
She wasn't great.
She
wasn't. She made me stand in a different part of the room than everyone else. I was the only black girl in the class. But she told me that was not an excuse to not do well.
How would you say the same thing to your kid today?
Yeah.
You would?
Yeah, I would. Because also my child comes with a lot more. So really, she's won the birth lottery. Warren Buffett says if you're born in North America, places like Canada, the US, you've won the birth lottery. And my child won the birth lottery in America. If you have two parents, if you have resources, you go to good schools, we could just go good healthcare, all of those things. I didn't grow up with healthcare as a child.
Yeah.
We went to the emergency room when I needed a throat culture. It's a very different experience. We didn't have a family doctor. I went to the dentist when I was, in my teens. So I could go on and on about these things, not devastating, they were just normal in my family. And I think with my daughter, one of the things that I've tried to explain to her, she's 11 years old, and I dedicate the book to her and children everywhere, is she has a lot more responsibility because of all the gifts she's received. She's got the full package. So when you get all of that, and I've had people push back at me. They're like, don't put all that on her. And I'm like, no, you can't be born with all of this and not have higher expectations around you, around at least how you're going to contribute to society in some way. So what I tell her is I expect you to do your best. And I teach her a lot about race and culture in our society. So she understands very, very clearly what the world is all about, what she might be up against, even though she's highly resourced, et cetera. My child is mixed race, but I tell her she's black. My husband takes offense, but I do, because I said, that's what people see.
Right. And you know what? I know we didn't talk about this as a topic at all, but if we could just go deeper on it. I mean, the interesting dynamic that everyone in this room deals with is that you and I both came from nothing. We became something. You've become many more somethings than me. But what all of our children face is the lack of the trial, the lack of those tribulations, the lack of those experiences. And I'm just curious, how do you compensate in a way for that, inner resilience that you've built up in now your 11-year-old daughter?
You do not rescue them. I think the struggle is everyone has struggles, no matter who you are, no matter what you have. And I will tell you, this is a very specific example, and this is an elite example, so I want to say that right off, that I learned from our nanny. So our nanny is Chinese. My daughter speaks fluent Mandarin. And one day, she's in a high chair. She's maybe 1.5 years old, 2 years old. She can speak. And she said she wanted something. We're all sitting, and I think my mic is going, yeah. And we're all sitting, and Everest asked for something. Handheld.
Yeah, if
it's going in and out.
Bring a handheld just in case.
So Everest is sitting, and all of a sudden I say to Lele, I said, oh, I'll get it. Are you going to get it? And she looks at me and she's like, she can wait. She's like, she can wait. And I looked at her and I was like, she's like, we don't need to get everything right away. She's like, I'll get it soon.
Right.
I thought that was brilliant. She was like, she can wait. And I was like, that's a really important lesson for a child who has all these people like, waiting on them and helping them. I didn't grow up that way. But I was like, because my mom would have been busy doing something, when I was 2 or 3 years old, so you would have naturally waited. So the idea that she said that to me, I was like, then you think about ways in which to make that a reality for a child. So I'll give you another one. My daughter loves this game that she plays on her iPad. It's called Toka, and she builds worlds with it. It's buildings, cities, all sorts of stuff. So starting when she was very little, she knew she could never buy anything on the iPad without asking, ever, ever, ever. So she says, Mom, she can't eat at anyone's house without asking, and she can't buy things on the iPad. So I said, she would come to me and she says, can I buy a place? Little, 4, 5 years old. And I say, how much is it? And so she says, $.99. I'm like, 99 cents. And I was like, Everest, let me think about it. Okay. Next time she comes to me, I go back to her and I said, because I've learned from Lele to let her wait. So I let her buy the place. Next time she comes to me, she's like, Mom, can I buy a place? This is, sometime later, weeks later. I said, how much is it? She goes, $2.99. $2.99. I was like, I'm gonna have to ask Baba. Baba is what we call Dad. I said, I'm gonna have to ask Baba. So she's like, okay. So I go to Dad and I'm like, Everest wants to buy a place, it's $2.99. So now she knows 99 cents and she knows $2.99 is a lot more. So, but she doesn't just get it, which you would think I'd say like, why am I making this such a big deal? So now we're watching a movie on streaming and you have to buy the movie. And it says $15.99. And she's like, this is ridiculous. She's like, Mom, this is so much money. She's like, I can't believe they're charging this much. So then I say to her, well, this is more like a toy because you're gonna watch it a lot.
Right.
And those other things you experience and you don't go back to them. So I'm putting value on things, but it's also about teaching her. So she's never willy-nilly thinking, well, we have it, it's no big deal.
Yeah. Well, this is great. I want to come back to this in a minute because I want to come back to your book. And the reason I want to come back to your book is because from the day we got it, I tried it with my 7-year-old and my 11-year-old and my 14-year-old. And they all freaking loved it. So this book, by the way, is not yet in print.
It's in print.
Oh, it's now in
It
print?
came out. I'm number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list for children.
When we spoke, it wasn't yet in print.
I was 4, then I went to 6, then I went to 2.
Okay, there's good reason for it. By the way, we're gonna get into this, but strongly encourage you to do this with your kids, your grandkids, your nieces, nephews, whomever. Go through it, have fun conversations around it. I really just personally wanna thank you for it. I'm gonna come back to that in a second, but maybe let's go back to a little bit of Ariel, and so like helping everybody here understand your world. To talk to us a little bit about Ariel and the role that you see the firm playing in the ecosystem of the financial service world and the values orientation that it actually brings to bear day to day.
So what I would say is, we're an investment firm. We're in Chicago. We have offices in New York, San Francisco, Australia. We're trying to make money for our clients. That's first and foremost what we wake up to do every single day. We're like sports. There is a score. And every day we know how we did. Did we win or lose versus the market? And our goal is to add value by investing in the domestic side in undervalued small and medium-sized companies that show a strong potential for growth. We do the same thing in emerging markets, and we do the same things internationally with different teams. And then last year, we started a private equity fund that seeks to scale sustainable minority businesses that will be tier 1 suppliers to Fortune 500 companies. Ariel has a storied history in the investment business because when John started the company, I said we were the first African-American-owned investment firm in the United States. But John's story is such a compelling one in that his father, who was a child of the Depression, my mother was also, John's father was older than my mom, but they both had Depression roots. He was the first class of African-American fighter pilots to go over in World War II as a Tuskegee Airman. And when he came back, one of the things he decided, having been a child of the Depression, was to teach John about money. So starting when John was 12 years old, instead of toys, he gave him stocks every birthday and every Christmas. And John says in the beginning it wasn't very fun. He would run to the Christmas tree and all he had was a white envelope. And he's like, the worst part is you had to tell your friends. You know, they'd say they got Monopoly or G.I. Joe. And he's like, I got 2 shares of IBM. But his father did something really great, which is that he allowed him to keep the dividend checks. And so he said he was a 12-year-old with cash flow. It was like free money coming in the mail, which is also what inspired me to write this book for 8 to 12-year-olds. And this idea that he was able to, in real time, real life, understand the stock market investing. That history and being rooted in investing and research and understanding the markets is so big for us. It stays fundamental to who we are and what we do. But it's also, it has significance, our foundings, to the industry that we're in. We're still very unique in our industry. There aren't a lot of people who look like me doing what I do. And I don't say that in any way as a badge of anything. I don't think it should be that way. I think we should have more of everyone participating in the capitalist democracy that exists in the United States, here in Canada, et cetera, so that more people have the opportunity to do well in our society. We know what the equity markets have done, and participation in the equity markets makes a huge difference over time just because of the power of compounding. And so I think from that perspective, we see our firm as being very, very important as a symbol in our industry. I remember watching this movie many, many years ago. Some of you may have seen it, called Glory Road. And Glory Road was about this NCAA basketball team that was the first basketball team to go on a court with an all-black lineup of players. And it was a team from the South, and it was playing another team in the South. And the coach in the locker room says, "This is now more than about the game." That's what we feel like. This is about more than the game. We have to perform in order to even be playing, but also at the same time, the significance of us on the court is very, very important.
And I want to go back to a comment you made earlier, which is, you know, you emphasize this need to stay green, so to speak. Does that shape how you view risk? Does that differentiate how you approach risk or risk management, you know, sort of from this beginner's mindset? Is there a different approach?
So it's you have to hold 2 ideas at once. So I talk about the fact that we are experts. An expert is someone who knows more and more about less and less. So there's a very big difference. If you need brain surgery, you don't go to your general practitioner. Both are doctors, but you go to a brain surgeon, right? So we're the brain surgeons of what we do in small and mid cap, especially 41-year history, one portfolio manager for 41 years, the longest track record in small cap value in the United States, probably the world. And wow. I can say that definitively. So that is something uninterrupted with the same portfolio manager. We had someone who had a longer record than ours, which was Chuck Royce, but he's just announced at 80 that he's retiring. And so that sort of puts us in the rarest and rarest of air. So in our universe, we know our names, but when you own companies or you're running a business or you're just living life, things hit you that you can't know or expect. COVID, financial crisis, there's no manual or playbook. So the person who has swagger and thinks they have everything figured out is the one who takes you down. Right. As the person who I gotta ask a lot of questions, maybe call some people, ask them what they're doing, as opposed to so many times people have this sense that, well, you're successful and you're supposed to know. That's why I wrote the book about money, because parents are embarrassed to say to their children that they don't know anything about the stock market, investing, money, and the like. And I'm just trying to use the book as a gateway to parents. Yeah. And so when we get into that mode, we shortchange ourselves and we shortchange the opportunities for our companies. So we're experts, but at the same time, that beginner's mind lets you say, maybe I got the stock wrong, or maybe there's something I didn't see or know. Or maybe I need to think about it differently, even though I have all this history that I can draw on that helps me with pattern recognition. Is there a new pattern here? Or do I need to go and rethink about this and test my thesis? Do I need to start all over as if I never owned this stock and think about it from scratch, even though I've owned it for the last 5 years and it hasn't done well? What do I see today that makes me believe the future will be better? Questioning myself, my process, our processes, our methodology, whatever it might be, not in a way of being a weather vane,
Right.
but in a way of being open. You know, at Ariel, we talk about, we don't hold our ideas dearly, we hold them lightly. You want the opportunity and the ability to be able to change your mind. We've all been with those people who hold their ideas dearly. We read a book during the financial crisis called Deep Survival, one of my favorite books. Who lives, who dies, and why in a crisis. That's the subtitle. And it's all about these crazy things that happen. And one of the things they say in this book is rigid people are dangerous people. And they use examples with the military, of the military officer who's leading his troops and sees danger but won't pivot because he's been given orders. And as a result of that, he walks the whole battalion into death because he won't pivot. And so that idea of you can be so rigid, these are the orders I got. Well, maybe you got to shift based upon the new information or common sense and not be so rigid. And so rigid people can be dangerous in stock picking. They can be dangerous in business in general. They can be dangerous in a military situation. There are a lot of examples where a rigid person can be a dangerous person. So these are sort of the roots of what I mean by that beginner's mind, but you could still be an expert. One decision stocks, they're only going in one direction. That means everyone has poured into them, which has created this self-fulfilling prophecy, which spits them up. And at the same time, the rest of the market has really been orphaned. So it's particularly true, thank you, particularly true of areas of the market that have just completely been overlooked, like small cap stocks, because they've underperformed dramatically relative to large. I'm assuming you can turn this off.
Yeah.
And it's been true of emerging markets, and it's been true of a lot of areas. So right now we say the risk is more pronounced in the area of the market that has done best. And while the areas of market have lagged significant, we'd be the first to admit it over the last 12 years, 13 years, that's where the greatest return and the lowest risk is, because those stocks just have less far to fall. They don't have those valuations, and they don't have that hype embedded into them, where if you miss, you get crushed.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely hear you. And how is if you were to look out at Ariel in 10 or 15 or 20 years, what do you see?
I think the active manager is going to return. You know,
The active manager, you said? Yeah.
Yeah, because the pendulum has swung too far. So my husband is George Lucas. I always joke I married Yoda's dad. And, you know, I think about our market in terms of the movie title. So I'm like, The Empire Strikes Back. That's all the large cap dominance. And we're going to be the return of the Jedi. So in 10 years, you're going to like, those Jedi really did come back. And so that's what I think will happen.
Okay, amazing. One of the things I glossed over, but you've been as an entrepreneur, as a corporate leader, but now also as a very prominent board member and advising some of the largest most prominent CEOs in the country and being a little bit of a horse whisperer to them. What is it that you think that you see uniquely differently than brilliant individuals like Jamie Dimon and even obviously you and Howard Schultz are very close. So, I'd love to just get what unique perspective, besides everything we talked about, which is the humility and the, what do you think your contribution on the board is?
I thought about this a little bit. So one thing, with the exception of JP Morgan, but I'm going to put a caveat on it. So I work really well with founders. So I started on the board of DreamWorks and became chair, working with, I called them the Dream Workers. I was with Jeffrey Katzenberg last night, who's one of my best friends. And it was Geffen, Katzenberg, Spielberg. And I was very young when I'd been on that board, and ultimately, as I said, became chair and led the sale of our company to Comcast. We were literally just talking about it last night because we were at that honoring Tom Preston, who started MTV and who was on our board. And of course, I've been on the board of Starbucks 19 years now, working with Howard, and Howard's been gone for a couple of years, but being a part of that, unbelievable rocket ship and story, and then became chair of Starbucks until very recently, and now I'm lead director. And I'm married to someone who founded a film company, George Lucas, who sold Lucasfilm to Disney. I work with John Rogers, who started Ariel. And Jamie, I always say, he didn't found JP Morgan, but it feels like he did. You know, he feels like he was the original founder and he treats the company that way. And the reason that I say that, I was on the board of Estee Lauder for 15 years. Again, family, founders.
Right.
I think one of the things that helps me in that situation is I can think long term. At Ariel, we have a turtle as a logo. I think secondly, the one thing for me is I don't second guess the leader in that situation. I'm trying to put myself in their shoes and then give them my best thinking based upon the circumstances that we're in. I think a lot of people are either, again, you're back to the know-it-all, or they are the people who, you know, there's a certain amount of confident reverence I have for these leaders. And I use that word those two words very, yes. I'm confident in my own right with my own point of views, but there's reverence for they built amazing things.
Right.
It is inarguable. So to sit there and think like somehow you're gonna outthink someone who has been at that level of performance and playing from 0 stores to 38,500 at Starbucks, that's ridiculous, but you can have insight. And I try to be very thoughtful about my insight, and my insight is I try very hard to root it in questions. So I talk about when I go into a boardroom, I want to have an original thought. My original thought is not a statement. People don't want to be talked to, but questions lead to aha moments. So I'll prepare my questions before I go, and my idea is nothing rhetorical, cannot be me too, cannot pile on to something someone else said, must have an original question that leads to perhaps some breakthrough idea. And when I was at Princeton, I had this professor who always used to explain to me the danger of reiterating. So he always used to say to me, our whole group, if you were in a small group precept and you'd say, I want to reiterate what Mo said, he would say, you mean iterate again? And he would make it super clear, you do not have an original thought. You're just, you know, so you go into meetings, we all do this. It's like, I just want to chime in on what this person said, or I want to double down. Not an original thought, not an original thought. Like that's what I think in my head. And so going in to have an original thought around a question, I think has always been very respectful, but I'm dogged. Like I'm not a shrinking violet, but I'm not a jerk. And I think that combination earns respect over time, this idea of confident reverence. I say this about my husband, I am like, he's a genius. Like I get to learn from him, but at the same time, he's my husband, so he's, you know, ridiculous too, you know, so we all know, you know, it's like a little crazy uncle sometimes. But the idea that I can really have true respect for that, of someone who can teach and have gems that you're just like, this is so smart. So, but at the same time, what do I bring to this? How can I move or advance the idea? I think that is something that I want to earn my spot in the room by adding value, not just being happy to be there. And I think I have worked with, because I work with founders, I've worked with people who appreciate that, who respect the pushback, who respect the thoughtfulness, and understand I'm also being respectful to them without being some kind of, kiss up.
Yeah. And you also have this unique perspective because you're watching the innovation at all these organizations that whatever they're investing in. And I'd love to just hear from you, like what trends you're seeing that will reshape how companies are run in the future. And then what implications does that have for capital allocation, either at Ariel personally or, with in your corporate capacity on these boards?
I think it's inarguable, and this is really stating the obvious, that AI is going to be something we can't even fully comprehend. I had the opportunity to get a demo of something that was like mind-blowing in Silicon Valley a couple weeks ago. I just couldn't believe it. It was someone talking to the phone, and the phone was doing things, and I was just like, this is crazy. So I don't think we just really understand it. It's like you couldn't understand the internet. We were all there for when it happened. You couldn't understand what the phone would be. You couldn't understand an iPad. Like these are things now they're everyday life, but we literally couldn't understand them. And so that's one piece of it. I also think that every company is a technology company now. But none of us thinks of ourselves that way, but we are. Every company is a technology company. Not just the tech budget that we all spend, not just the need for cybersecurity, but just the whole way of thinking has to change pretty significantly. And if you see yourselves as a tech company, we might be selling coffee, but we're a tech company based upon the app and a whole bunch of other things. I think these are things that are, at least from my perspective, I'm not trying to say we change the business, please don't think that. But just having that in mind, I think is something from banking to investment management to all sorts of areas. I think that really has changed the game. Now, at the same time, I don't think we have to be bleeding edge.
Right.
I think there are a lot of businesses out there. This doesn't mean you have to change your whole business model, et cetera. You just have to be more thoughtful and more open-minded in ways that perhaps you weren't before. I tell people at Ariel, number one way that you will not earn my kudos is to say, why do we do it this way? Because we've always done it this way. Mm-hmm. If you say that, we got problems. That cannot be how you anchor your thinking, nor, I remember Brian Roberts, I read a story about him in the Wall Street Journal who runs Comcast. He's like, around here, we are not sitting around talking about the good old days. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important. People anchor to a past that never is going to exist anymore. Yeah. And some of this anchoring to the past, I think, that is not going to exist anymore is because technology is going to significantly change our lives. The other thing that I think has fundamentally shifted things, and I think this is true of Canada, but I'm not 100% sure. I know this is not true of the whole world, but certainly in the US, this work schedule is different. And we're all still learning by doing the 3 days, 4 days, what that ultimately means for business and the world, I'm still unclear on. It makes me very uncomfortable, I will tell you that. And then it's like my grandma in a rocking chair, again, these young people today, that's what I sort of feel like. But I also know I only got where I am and you only got where you were because we killed ourselves working 24/7, basically. Yeah. And so, I go into offices, we go and have meetings, and there are no people. I mean, none. Wow. None. You like whole floors of nothing. And I'm like, I don't know how this is gonna end.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting conversation that is really worth expanding on. I am.
And Jamie, I love this example. Yeah. Jamie always says, he's like, I work from, he's like, he tells it as a joke. I do work from home too, on Saturdays and Sundays.
Yeah, I feel that way. Just in this world, putting aside tech, as you look into the world, what are you most excited about? What are you most anxious or concerned about? What are some of those top of mind issues for you?
I believe in the power of innovation and the human brain. And I think the human brain has had, we have only tapped so little of our epic potential that I think that's the mystery and the sort of inspiration I get from the world is what is possible. We're always breaking through new things. You don't know where it's going to come from. You don't know who it's going to come from. Talent and genius are equally distributed in society as long as your brain can be felt nutritionally as a child. Mm-hmm. That'll be the only time that you truly suffer. If you don't get enough nutrition, your brain cannot develop. So you won't see talent and genius equally distributed. But in every other way, if you get enough nutrition, you're going to find talent and genius in every corner of the world. And that's something to me that is really, really, really powerful. The other thing that I would say, my honest, sleepless night right now worry is the election. And I just fundamentally want us to be what I hope we are. And that is something that there are soul-crushing moments right now. Mm-hmm. That's the only way I can describe it to you, where you're just like, this can't be. And out loud, it just doesn't, it exists, but it's at a level of being so blatant that something's wrong. It feels very, very, it's very tense in America. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very.
Yeah, no, and we all feel that. I want to talk a little bit about, I mean, you've talked a little bit about why financial literacy and educating financial literacy has been so important to you. Could you talk a little bit about, I think it would be instructive, some of the projects that you've actually embarked on besides this book to really bring that change to the next generation? And maybe if you could also just touch on, the purpose of money. Like, it's an interesting question we all have to talk about.
So it's interesting. Part of the reason I wrote the book is because I said, no matter where you live in the world, African village to developed market, big city, London, Paris, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, you name it, Burma, you have to deal with money. Literally, it is a universal truth. It is a universal truth, and yet, in our society, it is a taboo subject for many people. So for wealthy people, they don't want their kids to be entitled, so they don't want to give sort of the whole story. For people who are struggling, they don't want their kids to be traumatized or worry about it. So as a result of that, both ends of the barbell avoid the subject.
Right.
At the same time, we live in a society, particularly in the developed world, where money is both, and this is something I'm going to write about, glorified and vilified. And it is something that does not make sense. So we have plenty of people that believe if you are wealthy, you are smarter. If you are poor, you're dumb and lazy. We have people who believe if you're wealthy, you screwed someone to get your money. You did something really bad. You didn't pay your taxes. You were a bad actor in some way. And then we have people who believe that, so they're vilifying success. And then we have people who believe that, again, on that other end, glorifying stuff in ways that undermine our values.
Yeah.
And so, at the end of the day, you could take everything I have. I've had nothing before. I know how to survive. And as long as my family is good, I'm good. Yeah. Literally, I could go back to a little one-bedroom apartment and we'd be fine.
George would be too?
He actually, more than me.
Oh, okay.
I have a husband who pays $65 for his gym shoes, which are the only shoes he wears. And he has like one pair. So it's like, literally, you open his closet and you're like, oh. There's like some shirts and a pair of pants and some underwear. That's it. There's nothing else. But I would say that, that I think that one of the things that's extraordinarily important is for us to, I think, be clearer, especially with young people, around where our values are when it comes to these issues, to demystify money. If you're a child, think about money through the eyes of a child today that we did not experience. Money spits out of a machine, or you pay for things with a card. Many parents explain to me that their kids say to them when they're struggling, I want to get this, and the parents say, we can't afford it, and they say, put it on a credit card. Because they don't know or understand the context of which, even the credit card piece of it. All money habits are inherited. So whatever your habits are, you are literally subconsciously passing it on to your child. It's 100%. If you overspend, they will. If you are stingy, they will be. I can go through all the things that you can just look and see. Again, patterns and pattern recognition. And so one of the things I think is very important for us to put this subject on the table at all levels of income, and to the extent kids know and understand. We were just talking about it in the back. Someone asked, how old were you when you wrote your first check? I swear I was like 8 years old. My mom told me to go get the checkbook and pay for the food that was going to be delivered because she wasn't home to work. And I started writing our checks and doing bills and doing things like that. Someone in the room just now said they were 24 years old. Someone said what the other age was, and I was like, I want people to know what things cost. Kids to know what things cost, because then they can have a better understanding of society and how it works. I'll give you one last example. I'm going through the McDonald's drive-thru with my daughter. She's getting French fries. And they said it's $5.40 with tax. She's 10 years old at the time. She goes, what is tax? just think about all the things a child doesn't, and we did tax in the car. I was like, well, this is what it is. This is what it pays for. So then I explained income tax to her. She was appalled. She was like, what do you mean you work for 4 months for nothing? I was like, not technically, but if you added it all up, it's actually more for me. But, giving her all these examples. She's like, what do you mean you don't get paid? I was like, no, I do, but they take it out. And she was like, I started to really think, and then I was mad at myself because I didn't do taxes in the book, but the idea of like all this has to be explained. And at the wealthiest levels and at the families that are struggling the most, we do nothing about it.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah. I know we're over time already, but I will kill myself if I don't ask you this one question, because I know you've thought about this much deeper than I have. What does legacy mean to you? And if you're advising other families who are thinking about the idea, what would you advise them?
I don't think about after I'm dead. I think about why I'm here.
Yeah.
I think about a couple of simple things, and I turn thoughts on their head that are not traditional. People want to be proud of their children. I want my child to be proud of me. I feel very strongly about that. I want her to be proud of her mother. And I think if she can be proud of me, that I will be pattering behavior that hopefully will make her at least be rooted in the values that I think are important, that hopefully I exemplify. I think the other thing, and so that becomes a legacy in its own way of what you pass on to your children. And those things that you're passing on, it's not financial. It's the most important things in life. It's the values. And then the last thing I would say about legacy is just going all in. I read this thing the other day, don't half-ass it. And I was like, my husband jokes with me, again, this shows you how his mind works. And I don't mean to sound inappropriate with the language, but he's like, she likes whole-assed. He's like, she doesn't like half-assed. I don't. Don't half-ass it. I mean, so many people, they don't go all in. They don't work really hard. And I'm like, this is our one shot. Like, life is long, but it's pretty short. Yeah. And so, having the wherewithal, legacy for me will be, she tried her best. She left nothing on the field. She worked really hard, and in doing so, it wasn't about her. I'm gonna be fine. It's the rest of the kids, the Black community, the girls that I'm worried about.
Yeah. And Mellody, first conversation today that almost brought me to tears 3 or 4 times, so thank you. But I know that you're gonna you've already made a tremendous difference, and you'll continue to make a tremendous difference. And if there's any way that we could be helpful to you, please don't be a stranger.
Thank you so much for your support.
Yeah,
all of
thank
you.
Thank you. This is great. As a small token of our appreciation, we have a little commissioned piece of art. We'll just take a quick shot.